And the Prime Minister's subject today is the future of democracy in Asia. We look forward to hearing about Malaysia's experiences and its challenges and what the fate of democracy in the region implies for the region's international relations. This meeting is on the record. It's being live streamed. Prime Minister, we look forward to your remarks and the discussion that will follow them. Welcome again. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to the audience here. Malaysia has gone through a very curious transition. I was leader for 22 years of the government party which ruled Malaysia for 61 years. Now I am leading the opposition, and the opposition has now become the government. So I'm not changing my sports. I suppose I still have the same whole ideas about authoritarian rule, of which I'm accused of being a dictator during my time. But I beg to differ. I was not a dictator. But that doesn't make anybody change their mind. Whenever they mention my name, they always describe me as a dictator. And today, a dictator is going to talk about democracy. I don't know whether I'm qualified or not, but I will try. In the first place, of course, democracy is not an Asian invention. It came from the West. Began, I suppose, from Greece, but now the whole world has been told that you have to become democratic or else. And regime change taking place in many places, and as a result of trying to be democratic, they have met worse fate than when they were under authoritarian rule. So does that mean that authoritarian rule is best? Well, of course, we'll deny that, because we think that the only system of government that should be practiced by all countries must be the democratic system. But the democracy is not something easy to handle. The basic rule, of course, is that the majority of the people have a right to choose a government to govern their country. But even in a democracy, there can be autocrats who rule rather tightly, as I have been accused of. But if you want to make a government work, you have to have certain disciplines. Asian minds are not accustomed to the idea that country can be ruled by the people. We have always had monarchs with absolute power, and we have survived in a way. Of course, there were a lot of criticisms against the monarchies of old, because they tend to be rather cruel to their own people in order to sustain themselves. But now Asians are told that they should have democracy. And democracy means not having any monarch or any dictator. It is the people who will choose the leaders who would lead the country. The assumption, of course, is that the majority of the people must know what is good for themselves. Unfortunately, they are distracted by other things, like money, for example. If they are given money, some of them would vote for whoever gives money, whether he is a Democrat or he is an authoritarian ruler. So sometimes, or rather quite often, it happens that a democratically elected ruler can behave like a dictator. And that's what happened to Malaysia since 2013, when the Prime Minister who has been ousted took over. He introduced into democracy a new slogan, and that slogan is called "Cash is King." In other words, he's saying that it is legitimate and proper to bribe in order to get anything done. But prime ministers are not paid very well. I think if you are in the private sector doing business, you're better paid. But for a prime minister who's running a whole country, the pay is very, very low. So if you want to bribe and you don't have money, you have to think of some ways to get money. And the previous prime minister decided that he would steal the money because he hasn't got enough money to give bribes which would change the minds of people. That shows that even if we elect a ruler, it doesn't mean that he will behave himself. There are mechanisms for removing a ruler who is not fair, who is cruel and all that. But sometimes the whole system can be converted to the dictator's ideas, and they will carry out his instruction because they know that they will be very well paid for that. So even in a democracy, there can be dictators. And we find that when working a democratic government, too many people have got ideas which they think should be carried out by the government. And because they have different ideas from the government, we have opposition parties. Opposition parties normally can only criticize the government, but it's seldom that they can overthrow the government or bring the government down. Unless, of course, it is a two-party system. But two-party is not very democratic. It means that some people will have to forget about their own ideas, their own ideals, in order to be a part of the other party, the opposition. Only if there is a united opposition can there be election to form the government. But it is not easy to have just two parties because many people will believe that they are the right people to form the government. And so when you see regime change taking place in the Arab countries, every one of those people who campaigned, who demonstrated in order to overthrow the authoritarian government, every one of them felt that they were the ones who should be running the government. But they are not united. They come from various parties. And the only reason why they think the government should be brought down is because they think they would be able to rule after the government is overthrown. But there are so many people who wants to be the government, and of course immediately after the overthrow of the authoritarian ruler, there will be a quarrel among the people who overthrew him because they belong to different parties with different ideas. The end result may be civil war or at least tension and instability in the country. And we see in some countries they lost the ability to run the country. They become failed nations because they kept on quarreling with each other and not getting any benefit at all from democracy. So we can't think of democracy as if it is a one-size shoes which fits all. because each country, each people have their own cultures, and some of their cultures are so strong that it is difficult for them to change from having a dictator or an absolute monarch and replacing him with someone you elect merely by making a tick on the piece of paper. This is not common with them, and therefore this idea cannot be easily practiced in many countries in Asia and in the Middle East. So we need to accept that democracy is not a perfect system. It has its faults, but to make it work, the mindset and the value system of the people must be capable of accepting rule by a person who's elected every 5 years. Sometimes, of course, it doesn't last 5 years, or sometimes he may go on to rule the country for 5 terms, but all these things are still quite democratic. But some will fail because of the quarrels that take place all the time with people sniping at the government, and the government spending the time and money in order to govern the country. He will not be able to govern the country because he has to face a lot of disruption coming from the very people who elected him. So in Asia today, we find not too many democracies. India is supposed to be the biggest democracy, and but the others are quite totalitarian, such as the countries of Central Asia. In the East, of course, although leaders may be elected, their ability to rule is not so good because of the constant sniping at the ruler, whoever he may be. So the future of a democracy in Asia, I think, will be something that will not be achieved overnight, as happens with some of the Middle Eastern countries. They change overnight, and today we see more problems than it was before they had democracy. You see civil war, you see a lot of fighting, and you see a lot of disruptions of the environment, and they are unable to rule well or to get others to come and invest in their country. So I hope that people will understand that it takes time for people to become democratic. The value system must be suitable for democracy before democracy itself can be used as a method of ruling a country. Thank you very much.